Welcome, everyone, to the People Strategy Forum podcast. Today's guest has made it his mission to help the smartest people in the room stop being the most misunderstood. Neal Thompson is a trainer and engineer who specializes in being technically brilliant. Doesn't mean that much of everyone that's in the room with you doesn't understand what you're talking about. So he has founded Teach the Geek, a platform that is designed to help engineers, scientists, and STEM professionals become confident, engaging presenters overall. So Neal has spent a lot of his time really helping those people be successful in business. And he's taken the fear out of public speaking for thousands of technical minds by giving them the tools to simplify complexity, connect real humans together, and deliver a presentation that actually lands with the audience. He's a speaker, podcast host, children's book author, and a contributor to Inc. magazine. And today he brings all that practical information and energy to the forum. So if your team their best ideas are getting lost in translation, you'll want to lean in and learn more about this. So please join me in welcoming Neal Thompson, the teacher of geeks. Welcome, Neal.
Thanks for having me.
So Neal, I know that you've had a long journey yourself. You started out as an engineer and so forth. So can you tell us about a bit of your journey? How did you get started in what you do, and what made you decide to really coach other technical staff on showing their best selves?
When I first started working, I was a research associate at a small startup company, and my job was basically doing experiments and writing up protocols and reports and passing off anything I generated to my boss, and he'd be the one that would present it to others. And I didn't mind that arrangement. It wasn't until I took on my second job at another company as a product development engineer that communicating with others became more part of my job. Although I will say, when I first took that job, I didn't know that would be the case. It was actually a few months into the job that my boss called me into his office and told me that I was going to be a project lead. Well, what's a project lead? It's essentially a de facto project manager without the title. And so one of the responsibilities I had was giving presentations on status updates in front of senior management on a monthly basis. So we're talking the CEO, CTO, CMO, C fill in the blanco, all the C's, sitting in this office or sitting in a conference room, listening to me and other project leads give status updates on the projects they were working on. And those first few presentations I gave were absolutely horrendous. I did not know it was possible to sweat that profusely from one's body, Sam. There I was doing exactly that. And I knew that I wasn't doing a good job because a lot of times I would get questions after the presentation that I thought I'd answered during it. And you'd think I would have gotten the hint after that first presentation, maybe this is something to get better at, but I didn't. After that first one, or second, or third, or fourth, it wasn't until my project got canceled that I realized this whole presenting in front of people thing, maybe this is something I need to get better at. And this happened almost, probably more than 15 years ago now, and I still think about it. But at the time, I thought I was going to lose my job. Luckily, that wasn't the case. I just was assigned to something else, but that definitely was the wake-up call that I needed. So what I ended up doing was joining Toastmasters. It's for those of you all that don't know, it's an international organization with chapters all over the world whose goal is to help people become more confident public speakers. So that was helpful. And I also started looking for opportunities within the company and outside to communicate with others. I wasn't shying away from it anymore. So it got me thinking, maybe there's something behind this. I don't think I'm a unicorn. And I realized that I wasn't a unicorn because I sat in on some of the other engineers giving presentations. And I realized their presentations weren't all that much better than mine. And so I thought, there's something here. And so that's essentially where the idea for Teach the Geek came from. It's myself as a technical person helping other technical people so that they're more comfortable and confident presenting in front of others.
So Neal, you were in a situation where you took action yourself to really go out there and get the training and better your speaking abilities. But have you seen organizations really take the step forward to to do the training or provide training for their engineering staff themselves. I know you specialize in helping those companies, right?
That's right. I mean, I'm a huge advocate for that. As you mentioned, Sam, I took the initiative myself to figure out how to get better. I suspected if the companies I worked for had such training in-house, I would have taken advantage of it. And who knows, maybe my project wouldn't have been canceled 15 years ago.
Right, exactly. So in your experience, how does investing in communication skills make a company more appealing to top engineering talent out there? Do you think if they provide this training, they will be able to attract more talent from the marketplace?
Oh, 100%. I'm going to tell you a story, Sam. Last summer, I attended a technical conference. So the majority of people in the audience for any of the presentations were other engineers. There was one person who gave a presentation who was a business development person. And after the presentation, this guy got a whole bunch of technical questions that he simply couldn't answer. I felt really bad for him, but luckily there were two engineers from his company in the audience, and they answered the questions from their seats. The room was small enough that everyone else in the audience could actually hear them, because obviously they didn't have a microphone, they're not at the front. But it got me thinking, why didn't one of them give the presentation? I mentioned this was a technical conference. It's going to be technical people in the audience. They're bound to have technical questions, but it makes sense for a technical person to be the one giving the presentation to these technical people. Yet here were these two engineers seated comfortably in their seats, not giving the presentation. So I firmly believe that organizations training their technical people to get better at giving presentations not only benefits the technical people, but also benefits the organizations, in that the technical people aren't just those geeks anymore in front of their computers or in labs or doing whatever the technical role is. They're more useful, I would say, to the company. They could be deployed to actually give presentations and represent the company, as opposed to relying on other people to do it. At least in my mind, it's way easier to train a technical person in becoming a better communicator than it is to train a non-technical person in what the technical person knows, so they can then go and present it to other people.
Yes, I mean, they truly deserve that visibility. And plus, as we're looking at career paths and moving up higher in the organization, if you want to take on a managerial position, or somewhere in leadership, you need to learn those skills. And if they're not provided to you, then it's difficult to advance in your career. Would you say that's fair?
Oh, 100%. I want to tell you another story, Sam. So you mentioned that I have a podcast, and I had a guest on maybe a couple of months ago, and she was telling me the story of one of the people she worked with. And she's a technical person, she's a developer, and this is another developer. And they were seated in this office. She could see his desk, so they're very close in proximity. But you couldn't just go up to this guy and talk to him, because he had a cube on his desk. And when the cube was green, that means you could talk to him. But when the cube was red, that means you can't talk to him. And so it was really interesting, her telling me the story. And I just remember thinking to myself, man, if I was her and having to go talk to this guy, had to look to the cube to see the colors every time I wanted to talk to this person, it might be an issue, because I mean, if something needs to be said, it needs to be said in a lot of cases that, when it needs to be said, not when the cube is green. So certainly if you're a person that's moving up within an organization and you want to be that leader, you're probably gonna have to get rid of the cube.
Yes, it's tough when you're a leader and you're not available to really guide your people, for sure. That can be a very big problem. But as the other thing is, we're looking at communication training, and it can actually also help retain your top talent, right? So if you're in a situation where your engineers want to be heard, they want to be able to advance in their organization, and you're not providing that communication training, it can really hurt your retention of that critical staff, as well as they may look to other organizations for more opportunity in training and development. So I think that's core. But what I'd like to ask you, Neal, is in your experience, what are the types of benefits you've seen overall, or you've witnessed overall, that your clients have when you go in and provide their engineering staff, their technical staff with this important training?
Well, I think the big benefit is other people know what you're talking about. And there's
Mhm.
been so many instances in which I myself and then other people that I've worked with would give presentations in front of others. And as I mentioned from my own experience, they get a whole lot of questions afterwards that they thought they had answered during the presentation. But because their presentation was full of so much technical jargon and they weren't explaining what all these terms meant, even though at one point they didn't know what those terms meant. So why would the people in the audience know? They come to the realization that their presentations are going over the heads of the people that they're speaking with, and it's affecting their own standings within the organization, and they're getting feedback that this is something that you need to work on. But I mean, as you mentioned earlier, a lot of organizations, they don't necessarily offer this type of training within their organizations, and they rely on the people who have the issue to figure it out on their own. And for a lot of them, they may choose not to do it. I mean, I certainly did, at least initially. As I mentioned, those sorts of presentations were terrible, and my project had to get canceled for me to get that wake up call. So with Teach the Geek, I really I'm keen on helping people improve those skills, so maybe their projects don't get canceled and they actually come to a successful end.
Yes. I know that in my world, I'm a compensation consultant, and so and a lot of the times there's math involved and so forth that gets quite technical for my clients to understand, and so it's really important to kind of break it down and show them the impact of what my solutions provide their people, and so it's kind of drawing that line from the complexity to the impact on individuals. And so I would love to hear about your approach, Neal, and how you typically engage with an organization, understand the problem, and go about solving that issue and helping people communicate better. So what does that engagement typically look like?
Well, firstly, it's figuring out what these blind spots are and the things that they want to get better at. It's like maybe about a year ago, I did a poll on LinkedIn because I was really curious to see what was the number one issue that technical people have with presenting in front of others. And it turns out that at least the number one answer that I got was balancing technical depth and clarity. And from the people that I've worked with, that has proven to be shown to be one of the bigger issues that they have. These technical people, they want to be clear in what they say, but they don't want to have to dumb down, not the right word, but oversimplify that they're talking about. But ultimately, it starts off with figuring out what would success look like if they were to improve on something, what those metrics would be. So then once you figure that out, then it's coming up with a process for them to follow. And when I first started Teach the Geek, I developed what I call this Teach the Geek to Speak process. It's a 6-step process to develop and practice any presentation you have to give. So I offer that to the people that I'm working with, and that seems to have gone over really well. But then not only the training is useful, but then you have to figure out how do you know if it's working. So what I often propose to people is developing a feedback form, I suppose you would call it, and rated on from 1 to 5. And it offers questions like, was this presentation understandable? Was this presentation relevant? Was this presentation actionable? Because ultimately, when we're giving, especially when it comes to technical presentations in front of non-technical audiences, they're seated in the audience, these people thinking, why am I here? Do I really need to understand what this is? And if I do need to be here, what do I need to do after this presentation is done based on what I've heard from this presentation? So figuring out what those types of questions can be to be answered by the people that are in the audience listening to these technical people, that would be the next step. So ultimately, it starts with figuring out what the problems are, developing a process to address those problems, and then also figuring out an approach to see whether the process is working.
Right. So answering those questions, why am I here? Why is this important for me to understand? And what do I need to do with this information after this discussion? Yeah, that's brilliant. Of course, I mean just the simple things are often missed because when especially I find that when technical people and many of them are introverts and are and they're up in their own mind when before a presentation, wondering about, okay, what am I gonna say, and how am I gonna say it, and how am I gonna survive in front of all these people. So then they miss the basic building blocks of delivering that message. And so for those introverts out there, Neal, I mean, is there certain techniques that you help them get comfortable with getting in front of people?
Yeah, ultimately it comes with the reps. I mean, you can't get better at it by avoiding it. I mentioned when I first started working, I had a job that didn't require any speaking, but it wasn't until that second job that it did require it, and so I was basically pushed into the fire. And also, I tell them you need to focus more on the benefits as opposed to the consequences, because because by getting better at speaking in front of others, even though you have this potential fear of being in front of others, there's so many potential benefits. You're seen as the expert within the organization. You are looked to for answers. You're able to move up within organizations. You have that visibility and that standing, hopefully, with decision makers. And you can't be that, and then you end up not being that technical person seated in their cubicle, frustrated or disgruntled because someone else got the promotion and pay raise you thought you deserved. But it just turns out they were just better at being visible amongst the decision makers. So I tell them to focus more on the positives of what they'll get by becoming a more effective communicator, as opposed to the fear of being in front of others.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've had some wonderful discussions with many technical staff in the past that, and some are neurodiverse, which, of course it's difficult for them to even have conversations with others, and in some ways, so it can be very challenging, but a very important field that you're in, Neal, in helping these individuals express themselves in meaningful ways.
Yeah, 100%, and you also have to think, especially if you're giving presentations within an organization as an employee, they want to see you win. They don't want to see you fall flat on your face. So always think about that too. I think that's really important.
So what are we have a lot of leaders that are listening in on this podcast right now, and wondering, okay, well, what are the first steps that I should take to really better my organization and have more training and development around presentations and speaking? So what are the first steps that leaders should take to improve ways that their technical staff can communicate better?
Well, I think you need to talk to the technical staff. And when it comes to their improving with their communication skills, figure out what they want to improve on. There's no sense in developing anything within an organization if you don't have the buy-in from those technical people, because ultimately they're the ones that are going to have to go through the training. And then once that training actually happens, then I think it's really important, as I mentioned earlier, to have some sort of metric as to whether it's working, because you don't want to develop something and then have no clue whether it was worth the investment. So I think if you cover those first two, you'll be fine. And then when it comes to the technical people themselves, encourage them to look for opportunities to speak in front of other people. In fact, I wrote an article a few months ago about companies encouraging their technical staff to be on podcasts, to go guest on podcasts, or their companies even developing one of their own. I know that a number of companies have done that, and the reason they do it is so those technical people get the practice of speaking impromptu in front of others. And then another idea that I've often suggested is developing lunch and learns, just regularly scheduled events that happen for the technical people that actually practice giving presentations in front of others. And I think what that does is it provides them that forum, but then the other people that work with them, they get to learn more about what these technical people do, what their actual role is. In fact, I wrote a LinkedIn post about this maybe a couple of months ago, in which I was saying, if you're an HR person and you're responsible for developing the job descriptions that go out for people, if you just were to sit and listen to a presentation given by the technical people within your company, you'll probably do a better job of describing what they do on a daily basis, so that your job description attracts more of the types of people you want for those technical roles.
Well said. Yes, and so another thing here, Neal, is I know that you have your very own podcast. Can you tell me a little bit about who that podcast is designed for?
That podcast is called the Teach the Geek podcast, and I interview people with technical backgrounds about their public speaking journey. When I first started it, I was really curious to hear what other technical people are doing to get better at presenting in front of others or public speaking generally. I've gotten some really interesting answers. Here's one of them. If you are nervous before a presentation, wiggle. Oh, actually, no. Here it is. When you're giving a presentation, wiggle your toes. That's what one of my guests said, and she says that by wiggling your toes, you are more focused on the wiggling than you are on the fact that you're nervous. Although I said, if you were to do this one, I would say probably do it with closed-toe shoes.
Yeah, no kidding. So fun. And so you're actually are talking to, are providing training, real as a first step for individuals that want to learn about the complexities and what I can do to really improve my communication skills. I mean, listening to your podcast is a good step. And then for those individuals that are listening in that would like to learn more about your organizational training that you provide, I mean, how can they learn more about that, Neal?
You can go to teachthegeek.com, and if you want to check out the podcast, you can go to podcast.teachthegeek.com.
Great. Any final messages that you'd like to have our leaders understand as we conclude our discussion today?
Sure. If you want to improve at anything, you could read all the books, watch all the YouTube videos, listen to all the podcasts, but you don't get better at it until you actually get out there and get those reps. When I had to give presentations, as I mentioned, I wasn't all that great at it. I sweated profusely. Now I don't sweat as profusely. I've gotten that under control, but that wouldn't have happened if I didn't actually seek out opportunities to present in front of others. So if you are in that boat and you're concerned about getting better, just think about all the benefits as opposed to the negatives.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Neal, for your time today and sharing your expertise here. I think that this is something that can really help an organization better attract and retain that top performing technical talent and help them grow in their careers and so forth. And so I think this is an important step of an important training that organizations need to put in place to enable that. So thank you very much for explaining the process and going through the details here, Neal. I appreciated the conversation.
I do too. Thanks again for having me, Sam.
All right. To all those listening, thanks for tuning in to the People Strategy Forum, and we'll see you next week. All right. Take care, everyone.